The following Truth Barista podcast is a High Beam Ministry production.
Near the White House overnight, a tense standoff with police as protesters tried to tear down a statue of former President Andrew Jackson. It comes as the American Museum of Natural History in New York has decided to remove a statue of Teddy Roosevelt in the face of growing criticism for its depiction of Native American and African figures.
A black man and Indian man look inferior, period.
The statue, unveiled in 1940, was meant to celebrate the former president and pioneering conservationist whose father helped found the museum.
The statue clearly, presents a white man as superior to people of color.
New video of demonstrators cheering as they brought down a Christopher Columbus statue in Baltimore. The statue had stood in the city's Little Italy neighborhood and was then dumped into the Baltimore Inner Harbor. A mayor spokesperson has said that the protection of the city's statues would not be a priority for police.
Welcome to the Erzatz Coffee Shop. This is Jay, your Truth Barista, and I'm serving up a steamy cup of God's truth for the average Joe.
Truth Barista, whoa, why such a long face?
Well, I've been kind of wrestling with this interesting idea. I want to run it by you today.
Okay, well, just don't run over me.
Okay, I won't. I promise I won't run over you, but this is what's been bothering me. Have you noticed how many statues are being pulled down and how many buildings are being defaced nowadays with these, with the rioters and with the anarchists and the Black Lives Matter people? It seems like people are absolutely losing their minds.
Well, and some of the people they're pulling down, it's pretty nuts. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, come on.
I know.
Seriously.
Well, I can understand some of the statues that they're tearing down, but yeah, you're right. I mean, they tore down a statue of Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, the black abolitionist. They tore his statue down. That's ridiculous. And they're even talking, well, maybe we should tear down Mount Rushmore, or maybe we should, it's just crazy. So I started thinking about that and going, why is it so important to people to tear down statues?
Well, that's a great question. So is that where we're going to head in our conversation and study today?
Yeah, I made a few notes, and I love the internet. I get so much information from there. It's great. So I started out thinking, what's the purpose? And Hebraically thinking, what is the function of statues? Okay? And I wanted to think of what are some of the statues in history, and that reminded me of famous statues and things in the Bible, because the same ideas in the Bible. And then it's like, why destroy statues? And that led me into history. So do you mind if I walk you through some of this stuff?
No, I love it. I'll just pretend I'm a statue right here.
Okay.
But just don't pull me down.
No, I won't. You can just stand still as a statue, and we shall go ahead. Okay, so what is the function of a statue? This is what I found. They are symbolic and they represent things, right?
Well, aren't they reminders too?
That's true. They symbolize and represent things. They memorialize things such as persons or events to keep things in your memory. And it's more than just historical figures. It can be things like, historical figures like rulers, scholars, saints, military leaders, celebrities, sports stars, business leaders. I mean, there's statues for all those guys, right? Okay. Well, they can also be for events too. People will set up a statue to commemorate an event. In fact, in the Bible, after a great victory, they set up a standing stone, as they called them. There's a particular name for them too. But they set up a standing stone to represent an event and memorialize an event, and they named the stone Ebenezer. Ebenezer, which means the stone or the rock of our help, that the Lord has helped us this far. Why? So we don't forget what the Lord has done for us, to remind us of who He is, and this represents a tremendous victory we had in God. So that rock is a type of statue.
Well, isn't that a form of an altar as well? I think that's what they did. They made an altar, and they worshipped, and they left that altar there as a reminder.
Altars are standing stones, so to speak. So it's not just a statue or an image that's important, but objects take on, a statue is an object, and objects take on those kinds of qualities. So I'm just focusing kind of on statues, but it can include building. It can include all sorts of things that either represent something, memorialize something, or remind people of something. Some of the statues in history that are really, really famous, such as the Sphinx. The Easter Island heads. We don't know when the Sphinx and those heads were put in place. Oh, how about this? The Pietà. Do you know what the Pietà is?
No, but it sounds like an Asian dish.
No, it's not. It's actually a very famous statue of Mary cradling the dead body of Jesus on her lap. It is an absolutely beautiful sculpture, and it was created in 1499. It is a masterpiece of work. So there's the Pietà. How about this one? The Christ the Redeemer statue in Brazil. Remember that great big huge statue with Jesus?
It's in Sao Paulo.
No, it's in Rio de Janeiro.
And they were talking about pulling that down, by the way.
I know, ridiculous. Well, here's one of the most famous ones in the world, the Statue of Liberty.
Just thought about that, and I'm surprised they aren't trying to pull that one down.
I know, so keep that in mind. I mean, so anyway, so these are various statues. There's a really unique statue in Scripture, and it's the one that never really existed in statue form. Do you remember the book of Daniel? And it's Daniel chapter 2.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and what did he see in the dream?
Well, he saw this, it's like a military guy, right?
Well, he saw a statue, and it had 5 different layers of materials in it. But what we find out is the statue represents something. Each of the layers represented something. The gold was Babylon. The silver chest was Medo-Persia. The bronze belly was Greece. The iron legs, some people say Rome. Some people say something else. But what the whole statue represented was this march of empires through history from Nebuchadnezzar's day to the end. So that statue to Nebuchadnezzar represented the dominion of man on earth. So statues do this. They, once again, symbolize, represent things, they memorialize things, and they remind people of things. This is what's interesting. In that dream, a rock not cut with hands, an object which represents something, comes out of the sky, hits, destroys the statue, and a mountain made of rock grows in its place. So here you have a statue that is man-made, destroyed by something that is God-made, so that God can set up his kingdom. That's the meaning of that particular dream. You tracking with me so far?
Well, I am, yes.
Okay, so Israel was told when they come into the land, they are to destroy the statues that the Canaanites had created. These statues are, and here's a test for Amazing Larry, what are these statues called? These little statues that you worship, you know?
Well, they're called idols.
Yes! And idle hands are the devil's playground.
Idols, idols, idols.
That's right. They forget American Idol. It was Canaanite Idol.
Well, there are some groups today in Christendom that just will have no statues of anybody because they consider them to be idols, right?
That's right. That is actually tagged on to this whole idea that God said, you shall not make an image of anything on earth, above earth, or under the earth. In other words, don't make a representation of anything else. I am the only representation that you would have. And don't even try to make one of me, because you can't. You can't fathom me. You can't put me into human terms. So this is the prohibition against images. I think it's funny that God says, you shall not make an image of me, yet he reserves the right to do it himself. He came in human form. He is a living image. Jesus is the living image of the invisible God. That's what it says in Colossians chapter 1.
But he gets to do that because you know why?
Because he's God.
Yeah, right.
It's his prerogative. Okay, now these idols were to be torn down because they would serve as a proxy for worship. Instead of worshiping that little g God, I can worship the statue, which now is worshiping the God. So if I didn't want to worship the God, what do? I tear down the statue. I tear down the idol. And you're right. Over history, even in the Christian church, there were people that took a hold of this command of not to build an image of anything on heaven, on earth, or under the earth. They were called iconoclasts. It's a great word. And what had happened is over the first, say, 9 centuries of the Christian church, you had people who were beginning to make beautiful artwork to decorate their gathering places. And they would be like paintings. They would call these icons. Icon comes from the Greek word, which just basically means image. And so they would create these images and they would represent biblical events, people, and it got to the point where they almost became mystical. It's like, well, just as an idol represents a spiritual thing, so these icons represent a spiritual thing. Now, because the spiritual thing is most important, then we should hold these images as important. So we don't worship the images, we venerate them, we revere them, we hold them in high esteem. Well, the problem is people looked at that and said, well, isn't that a matter of semantics? If you're worshiping the icon, you're worshiping this being behind it, God. So in order to make sure that God gets the worship and not a formed thing, the iconoclasts, and it comes from the word klastes in the Greek, which means to smash. The iconoclasts in the 8th and 9th century came into these churches, these Eastern churches of a split Roman Empire. So the Western church was against the Eastern church, and and they came in and they smashed these things. Why? Even though they represented good things, they were almost taking the place of the good thing, and that cannot be according to God's word. So that's where you get the iconoclasts from. So in a religious sense, as I made in my note here, it's one who destroys sacred religious images. All right? Now, there's a secular sense of this word iconoclast. It's one who attacks and seeks to overthrow traditional or popular ideas or institutions. So destroying statues today is not necessarily on its surface a religious thing, but it's what that statue stands for, an idea or an institution or a popular idea or a traditional idea. Are you tracking with me so far? And what is that kind of cooking in your head?
Well, what's cooking in my head is that we're trying to get rid of our past, because statues do represent our past. They're leaders, they're Confederate Army folks, whatever it might be, but we're trying to get rid of all of that because it represents an America that they don't want anymore.
Exactly. They're trying to destroy the idea or what it represents, and even an institution that particular object represents. So, for example, I've found some great articles. I'll just reference a few short quotes here. Is why destroy statues? Well, it's to erase what it symbolizes or represents. I got this from Why Do Monuments Matter? From an article, November 2017. And the writer, Dr. Niam Ngaba, I'm sorry, she's Irish, I can't pronounce the name.
Irish?
Yeah. From the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance. She says, not only do they represent a particular version of history, they also represent the power of that history and the fact that it is given prominence and authority. It would be easy to tell somebody protesting the removal of a controversial monument not to worry, that history is not being erased, as it is still amply represented in books and other archived sources. However, the key issue is not the erasure of history, but rather the fact that prominence, power, and authority is being taken away from that particular historical narrative. So in other words, what she is saying is we're destroying Confederate statues because we want to take away the power of the narrative of the Confederacy, which backed slavery.
But that is still changing history, because history is history, regardless of how much power that people think it has. You know, they may think they're lessening the power, but to me, it's changing the narrative.
You're right. What they're trying to, you can't change history. You just can't. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to remove the symbolism. They're trying to erase what it represents. They're trying to forget what it memorializes. And they're trying to stop being reminded of what it is. And in essence, what they're trying to do is to throw history in a closet, lock the door, and throw away the key.
But that isn't even educational. That's anti-educational, because we learn a lot from Nazi Germany.
We learn from both good and bad things.
Well, exactly. We use Nazi Germany as an example of what not to do.
And what do they say? Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. So yes, when people are attacking statues, it's because let's face it, they have some sort of an animosity toward this thing. So because it triggers a response in them, they find it unacceptable. Here's another article. The quote from this one is, problems arise when monuments seem to represent a nation or an ideology that is no longer acceptable. And hence, that's the attacking of the Confederate statues. The Confederacy doesn't exist. It died in 1865. The idea of slavery, which was part of Southern life, is no longer acceptable. Increased sensitivity to the evil of slavery today and in the early years of our nation is leading to an increasing rejection of anything that symbolizes anything slavery may have touched. In other words, we got to get rid of the Constitution, we got to get rid of the Declaration of Independence, we got to get rid of the Confederate statues, we got to get rid of the paintings, we have to get rid and shelve and lock away anything that has to do with touching slavery in any way, shape, or form, whether good or bad. This is why the idiots tore down the statue of Frederick Douglass, because he was of that era and he is associated with the idea of slavery because he was a slave, but he was an abolitionist. If I can put it this way, they were too ignorant to make the differentiation between the two. And so they mindlessly tore down that statue. In fact, they not only tore down his statue, but they tore down 2 other statues of famous abolitionists as well. Why? Because they're related to that era, and we can't have anything stand from that era because I'm all hurt inside about it. And this is just pure ignorance.
It is ignorance. And you know what else is ignorance, Truth
What?
Barista? It's ignorance that we sit here with empty coffee cups.
Well, why don't you go get some?
Hey, my name's Lindsay, and I come to the coffee shop every day for a good cup of coffee. And on some days when I get here, there's a great Bible study going on with the Truth Barista. It is so good that as I listen to what's being talked about, I even have to order another cup of coffee or 2. There are so few places today where you can actually get a good conversation about God and His Word. But you can right here with the Truth Barista. Every week we hear truth being talked about, and it is as rich as their coffee. There are 2 things I'd like you to do. First, let people know how good the conversations are here with the Truth Barista. And then second, could you help out with a monetary tip to help this kind of communication stay on the internet each week? I talked with the Truth Barista, and we're being heard in the Far East, the Middle East, and all around North America. So this is a solid investment of your charitable dollars. The place where you can donate securely is thetruthbarista.com. Thanks for your help in helping us tell people about the truth in Jesus Christ.
The Truth Barista podcast is a production of High Beam Ministry, shining the light of God's truth on the road ahead. To get more Truth Barista podcasts, go to truthbarista.com. We love your comments and your suggested topics, so send suggestions to your Truth Barista at The Truth Barista, all one word, thetruthbarista@gmail.com. I want to tell you about a podcast you cannot ignore. Why? It tells the truth on how to live in our uncertain world.
Be the best thing since sliced bread.
It's showtime.
On your way back up, bring some popcorn.
I dare you to step over this line. Okay, I'm a steppin'.
So join us now for The Truth Barista. Okay, we were talking about statues, right?
We were.
And people don't like statues because of what they're reminded of, what they memorialize, what they represent. Okay, as I mentioned to you at the beginning of our talk, buildings can actually act like statues. Any object can act like a statue. Why attack a police station in downtown Minneapolis? Because to the attackers, that particular building represented things. What did it do? It represented authority. It memorialized the state, and in my view, it reminded the people that the civil authorities are in control. So when the anarchists, Black Lives Matter rioters, etc., and the whole gang, they don't like what it represents, so they erase it. They declare it unacceptable, and they refuse to tolerate its existence. The exact same thing, by the way, while tearing down a precinct is a bad thing, the exact same thing happened to the Berlin Wall. And that was a good thing, because they erased what it symbolized and represented. They erased it as a memorial to the Soviet Union taking over Eastern Germany, and they were sick of being reminded that we are a divided nation with half of us under Soviet rule. So it actually can be a good thing. So do you want me to spin it into something that
well, I know you're
something?
going somewhere with all of this, and I would be interested to see where you're headed.
Okay, here's where I'm headed. Mankind was created in God's
image.
So
all
in
right.
a sense, we are God's living statues on earth. So now let's put this idea of God's image into this idea of statues statues that we've been talking about. We are living statues that represent, memorialize, and remind. How do we do this? We are living statues that symbolize and represent the one and only God. We as people are living statues that memorialize God's original design and his intent for earth. We are his living statues to remind all who really is the sovereign of the world and who is in charge. So again, why do people destroy statues? To erase what it represents, because what it represents has become unacceptable to them and intolerable. So they attack it for what it represents, memorializes, and reminds them. Have you noticed, and here you go, have you noticed that this attack on historical statues has now also shifted to attacking churches and statues of Jesus and statues of Mary?
Well, absolutely, because they represent a white society.
It also represents, I think, on a spiritual level, these things of God that people do not want memorialized or to be reminded of or what they represent. Here, July 15th, a statue of Jesus was beheaded in Florida. And it's just among the latest attacks on Catholic churches. This is going to blow you away. There was a 249-year-old church known as the Mission San Gabriel in California. 4 other churches besides that one were all attacked between July 11th and 12th. Why? Because of what they represent and symbolize, what they memorialize, and what they remind people of. In France, where there is a very large growing Muslim population, in France, they have had, on average, 3 church attacks a day in France. And so the question is, they're attacking empty churches. What happens when they start attacking churches that aren't empty? Which, by the way, did happen recently in Florida. A man drove his car into the front door of a Catholic church in Florida, and then he firebombed it, and there were people who were still inside. Did that make a lot of national news? No, it didn't. But it happened, and it's happening. There is this kind of leftist anarchists iconoclast thing going. They're becoming image breakers. Why? They don't care about a statue. They care about what it represents, what it memorializes, and what it reminds them of. They're trying to destroy what's behind the statue by destroying the statue. Are you following me?
I am following you. Of course, that is pretty common, what Jesus said that would happen, right? Is that you will be persecuted for my name's sake.
That's exactly what he says. He says, they're going to persecute you because they hate me.
Right.
Why? Because we're supposed to be the embodiment of Jesus on earth. The more we look and act like Jesus, the more we will be attacked. Now, the corollary to that is, if we're not being attacked, are we really looking and acting like Jesus, or are we more like the world? I'll let that sit on somebody's toes for a while.
Wow. But I have always said, at least it appears as I've read things, that all of this attack is against the Judeo-Christian values, which has really built a lot of Western civilization. And now we don't want any of it because it represented some stuff that people don't want. But that's what they're after, right? Destroy that, and then they can resurrect their own leftist anarchy kind of ideals and ideology.
If you look at the Black Lives Matter website, and if you look at these anarchist websites, they're using race and these other societal ills and topics to actually fuel what it really is. It is a socialistic Marxist takeover of Western civilization. And because Marx was vehemently anti-God, it is no surprise that this movement has an anti-God spirit to it. So while it's trying to tear down history, it's also trying to remove the Judeo-Christian underpinnings that inform our history and build us up as a culture. And so, yeah, we have flaws, but the Judeo-Christian culture is what really keeps us on track. Case in point, 2 revolutions. The American Revolution had the Enlightenment ideas, but it was underpinned by Judeo-Christian values. 13 years later, France had a revolution with Enlightenment values, but totally rejected Judeo-Christian principles and values. What happened? Yeah, the American Revolution had a war, but we came out of the war and we rebuilt and the nation became prosperous. The French Revolution, without the boundary and the control of the Judeo-Christian values, tens of thousands of people were executed by guillotine. The Jacobin Revolution was horrific. In fact, even the founders were guillotined at the end, and it led to the rise of another, if you want to say tyrant or emperor, Napoleon. And even today, the secularization of Europe is now leading to the tearing down of churches and the Judeo-Christian values still in Europe today. Now it's being reinforced by an anti-Christian, anti-Judeo-Christian Islamic movement within Europe. So they're actually positioned far worse than we are here in the United States, but it has been exported, now it's being homegrown in the United States. So, what should we expect? If they are attacking the images that represent God, then we should expect in the near future, if this movement keeps going, we should expect attacks on Christians as the walking images of God. Now, here's the point too, is there is a real end point to this. It's not just to tear down. It's to tear down in order to rebuild. Everybody is saying we want to fundamentally change the United States. What are they talking about? Obama and his ilk and all of the people on the left were very clear. Look at the Democrat platform today. They don't want God. They want sex at any sort of combination and expression, and they want innocent bloodshed. No restrictions on abortion. Those are the three things that brought down ancient Israel. Idolatry, no God, except our God, shedding of innocent blood, and sexual immorality. Those three things destroyed Israel. Well, guess what? The same people are pulling the same thing today, which tells me if Satan pushed that agenda in Israel to bring them down, he's pushing the same agenda here to bring us down. Why? Because Satan wants to take God's place. Remember during the temptation?
Yes, I do remember the temptation. Let me just finish my thought, and then you could go on. But isn't that a coup against God? Isn't that Satan's agenda against God from the very beginning?
Satan's coup is in Isaiah 14. He says, I will ascend to the heavens. I will set up my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of God's assembly, and in the remotest part of the north, I will ascend above the highest clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Satan came to Jesus during the temptation and said, you see all these great kingdoms in their splendor? I'll give them all to you if you just worship me. In other words, put me in your Father's place. Thankfully, Jesus put him in his place, and that didn't work. But we see the same spirit working today. In China, President Xi has said to Christians, you're all on government welfare here, you poor Christians. Well, tell you what, you're going to take down every religious icon, representation, a cross, picture, whatever. You're taking it all down. You're putting Xi's picture up, and you're going to worship him in the state. That's going on right now in China. In Malaysia, Christians are being told to renounce Jesus. In other words, stop being images of God on earth, or we're going to let you starve. We will destroy the image. That's still going on. And by the way, during the end times, it is really fascinating that if you get rid of the image of God, you have an antichrist who does what? Who builds a what?
An image.
Exactly. A representation of himself, a memorialization to Satan's work, and a reminder of who's in charge, with air quotes here, which is Satan. So really what it comes down to is this destroying of statues really informs us what's going on a spiritual level, as humanity is now in this massive two-poled, this dichotomy of a battle of which truth is going to win out. Is it the truth of God, or is it the false truth of the enemy? And this is what I see as the core of what's going on right now.
Well, we don't want to underscore just the Chinese or the Europeans. We also have the same anti-Christ spirit here in America. Look at Governor Gavin out in California. Didn't he recently say that Christians couldn't meet in small groups because it was, against the health conditions of a COVID-19? I mean, just the whole idea that we can't meet together as a group is, to me, an infraction of liberty and could easily be something that they want to destroy.
I see two quick things before we have to get back to work here. Number one, this thing about shutting down churches is, number one, flaunting and defying the Constitution. That is a direct attack on an underpinning of this nation. Number two, by trying to shut down large groups and small groups, what's he doing? In a spiritual sense, he's trying to shut down the body of Christ. He's trying to shut down the corporate image of Jesus on earth. And at which point, the Christians have two things to stand on, two legs to stand on. Number one, we will not bend the knee to the people who are trying to eliminate the body of Christ in its actions or in its words. And number two, we as Americans will not bend the knee to people who are flouting the Constitution. I want to see Christians stand up and say, before we bend the knee, you show me in the Constitution where you can do this, as opposed to, well, now that you've done this, I have to now take you to court and prove that I can do this. No, the Constitution tells us we have freedom to worship. We don't have to petition a despot like Newsom or Garcetti or anybody else who's a leader for our God-given rights. They have to go petition God to take away those God-given rights for us. And it's about time the church stands up as a whole across the United States and says to these political leaders, no, you prove it first, and until you prove it, we will not bend the knee. You will not tear down this image of God in this nation.
Wow. The Lone Ranger.
I love it. I love when you get all so, kind of on that high horse.
And that's what you get with the triple espresso. Thank you very much.
Hi-yo, Silver!
A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty Hi-yo Silver. The Lone Ranger.
Hi-yo, Silver!
I love it.
So there's just a few quick things we need to do. In the meantime, as living statues, what do we need to do? We need to build our faith up. As it says in Jude, that we need to build ourselves up in the most holy faith. We need to build one another up, like 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Encourage one another. Build each other up, as you're already doing. We need to pray for the enemies who are trying to tear us down. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, Jesus says. And we need to help those who are under attack, which is 1 John 3:13 through 18. How can we say we love our brothers and sisters if we don't come to their aid during these days? We have to steadfastly stand as God's images on earth so that we can continue to represent God faithfully, memorialize Jesus' death and resurrection on our behalf, and to remind the world who is really in charge. This is Jay, your Truth Barista. Thanks for listening to the Truth Barista podcast.